I wanted to make North America a contender, basically I would just need a fuck ton, like a metric fuck ton of money. If I had a metric fuck ton of money, what I would do is I would honestly, I mean, there's two ways to look at it, okay? So the first way to look at it is if the unbanned players get unbanned, which now seems highly unlikely, right? If the unbanned players get unbanned, all that needs to happen is, let's say I have a shit ton of money. I would create an organization. I'd create a company for esports, and I would basically just go up to players and organizations, and I'd buy out the players that need to be bought out. So those players that need to be bought out into one org, if people are unbanned, obviously I would start off with Steel. I would just hire Steel. I would say, I'm going to build a team around you. I will compensate you for, basically you're going to be putting a lot of hard work into this team, and I'm going to compensate you for the time that you're going to lose from your stream, because there's no way you're going to dedicate yourself to being as much of a streamer as you were before. You can stream in your free time. I don't care if you stream in your free time, but there's still a requisite amount of hours that I want you to dedicate to the CSGO team, like weekly, because our goal is to contend for and win majors, ultimately, under the banner of North America. And the way we're going to accomplish that is you are going to have to stand up and step up as a leader and as a man. You're going to take full responsibility for everything that happens to this team. You're going to have full control and full leadership over how the team is run, the team culture. You're going to be responsible for communicating to everybody what's required of them in terms of communication, what's required of them in terms of, mid-round communication, what they're holding, what they're doing, where they're going, what they hear, what information they're gathering, where they feel like people are playing based on where nades are coming from, all of that makes a good team, and in communicating in a way that is proper. And I would tell them, if anybody doesn't show up, you're also responsible for making sure people come into practice, for drilling them, running dry runs, running, CT side setups, having basically everything down to a T, practiced and ready and regulated and ready to go. So it's not just on the fly. Oftentimes when we see Steel trying to call, he doesn't even try to step up into that role, because he knows if he were to do so, and if somebody isn't buying in or somebody is doing something different, there's no point in calling in the first place. So why take the responsibility and the accountability for leadership if you're not going to have full leadership? People are just going to do fuck all. So basically the team would revolve around Steel being the primary support player on this team, and Steel being basically the primary in-game leader, strat caller, CT side strat caller, setup, just knowing what the economy is of the enemy team. And obviously I would also hire a coach with him to keep track of, economy, when teams execute, what teams are doing, where they're doing it, just filling in the gaps and whatnot. But the brunt of the leadership would be on Steel. So that's a pretty tall task, but that's just, I think he would love it. He would thrive in the role. And one of the reasons why I'm picking Steel over anybody else in North America is just because of how he understands the game. He understands how to work off of things that he did before. He understands how to pick up the pace, and he understands how to not be predictable, which is extremely important, because one of the issues that I have with DazeD, even though DazeD is a fantastic, just a fantastic player. I think DazeD is an extremely skilled Counter-Strike player. He's critically gifted as well. That's one of his biggest assets. More often than not, he makes the higher EV, positive play in any given situation. He's a total asset to NACS because he has been critical of pro players and improved their competitive play. He's basically just a very mechanically skilled, meaning, his movement's good, his aim is good, and he's also a smart player. So, DazeD is very close to being a complete player. He's very polished, and he has an understanding of risk reward that surpasses the overwhelming majority of NA pros. But I think his CT side setups, he understands them extremely well, and he can almost always put his players in the most likely spots to succeed on the CT side. but I think he suffers historically of being a static caller insofar as that his approach is almost always very textbook. He mixes up what he calls, so he's not static in that regard, based on what he thinks will take his opponents off guard, so to speak, or like, okay, well, like we did this last round, so let's like take calls control this round or something. But his process is formulaic, and like EU IGLs like Taz, Pronest, and Exist have all been able to historically see a step ahead of where he's setting his players up and exploit it. With that being said, DazeD, honestly, like personally, it is very insular, judgmental, egotistical. He carries along with him like an air of just this unmerited conceit. Often if DazeD wants to explain why a player isn't good, he will say something like, they're just not good, or they just don't have what it takes, or they don't have the skill ceiling to be a good player. Like they just don't have the skill ceiling. Like the skill ceiling's not there. It's just not there. I don't get it. DazeD makes no actual explanations. And, you know, even as an in-game leader, if you're listening to his calls, his comms, like in an actual match setting, he does so very efficiently, assuming that people understand exactly what he means, even though he's calling something like just off the fly, like very efficiently. And if there was a miscommunication, he gets very upset and blames the receiving party always. He never takes fault with himself, only the people he's playing with. So he's very self-oriented, kind of like someone in MM who can only complain about his teammates and never take any accountability to ask themselves what they could have done better or communicated better to win the round. Furthermore, one of the biggest issues, and the biggest issues anybody has at DazeD as a caller, is his T-side setups were just brutally predictable. He would almost always set up into a default, not particularly to gather info, not a European-style default, but literally he perpetuated the idea of the North American default of, let's work into a default, let's set up for picks, meaning everybody's just peeking like kind of like sort of one by one and just trying to work a pick one by one. But just, you know, not to gather info, but in hoping that the CC's overextend with a peek and hoping one of his talented players would exploit their mistake. Then after he gets that pick, he doesn't take that pick and run with it or anything because they're not really in position to. And even if they are, they just coddle together and wait. He'd wait after that, almost always. More often, like 80% of the time, he just sits there and waits and holds, presuming the CTs would make another mistake trying to even the score. And then if none of these options presented themselves, he would rush into a bomb site with the rest of his team with about 20 seconds left on the clock when the CTs know exactly where they are, where they're coming from, and where they're going. That's what it means to have DazeD as a T-side in-game leader historically. Beyond the scope of that, DazeD almost always had this idea that he was somehow above other human beings because he played a video game better than them. He would keep a barrier between himself and other players, basically contributing to the current clique culture of NACS. He also perpetuates the concept of scoreboard-based CS, where he would just basically hold tab and determine who is doing well or not based on their KD. Ultimately, as a person, it's clear that he never grew up, he never developed, he never did anything outside of Counter-Strike, he never had to develop any part of himself outside the game, socially or academically. He's an analytical thinker inside of the game, but outside of it, I mean, the guy's just absolutely bereft of any critical thinking skills. He famously talks about how he doesn't know anything about politics, so he won't comment about it, or, you know, well, anything about Counter-Strike, really. One thing which caught me off guard is he stated that if he doesn't know something, he doesn't comment on it. He doesn't know what I know personally, or probably hasn't watched more than 5 minutes of my videos, yet he said I'm a clueless idiot who talks about something when he doesn't know enough about it. Well, I've probably watched more EU demos than DazeD has in the last year. Like, honestly, I've watched hundreds. I mean, he's accomplishing that feat by talking about what I know, or what I say, or what my views are on anything, because he doesn't know what they are. He's an idiot. He's clueless in regards to that, but he's still talking about it. I don't know if he's able to see the hypocrisy in this. And all of this actually comes from his psychological understanding of social dynamics. In DazeD's mind, it seems like everything is either a negative EV play or a positive EV play. He's very tactful. He's very calculating, and he's demonstrated how calculating he can be. Like, first encouraging swag and everyone to deny everything, and then, you know, when caught off like red-handed, then he's all of a sudden on his stream, he's like on his stream just basically like giving away thousands of dollars of his inventory because he's, apologizing profusely. Everything is made for him to socially look as good as he can when he needs to. But as anyone who watches him regularly can tell, he can't help but unleash his inner sociopath. It's the same thing he said about Mo. He said, Mo has been a faggot to me lately. And I think this is so fucking telling. Mo has been a faggot to me lately, though, when asked about what he thinks of Mo. So he's saying, like, all these good things about Mo, and then he goes, Mo's been a faggot to me lately, though. So I should just say he's an idiot. That gives such insight into the mind of DazeD. If he feels like someone is less socially powerful than himself, e.g. not Semler, and that person criticizes him, then he will try to defame and ruin that person as much as he can to rid himself of any critic. His insecurity and lack of accountability also exists within how he regulates his Twitch stream. It's personally beneficial to him for people to just endlessly spam meaningless copy pasta and bullshit, because then he won't ever have to read like actual legitimate criticisms of him in chat or anybody saying anything negative to him in chat. And the stream of copy pasta can effectively censor any negativity without him having to give it any attention or any thought. The fact is, he's been to 3 majors. He's never made it out of groups at any one of them, all in teams that he personally led. The furthest he's gone is the furthest that Complexity has gone, winning an ESA LAN, or Cloud9 has gone, getting to the finals of a Face-It LAN and losing, as he did in Face-It Milan. And Cloud9 famously in DreamHack Summer Valencia went to the finals in that as well. So, I mean, yes, you could say maybe that these teams like CLG have gotten more opportunities, but with significantly less talented players. And it's not like, iBuyPower did any better than these teams. They went to majors and they got just dumpstered 16-2. Famously on Cash, iBuyPower died, or got dumpstered, and they lost really badly at ESWC, and they were so upset about it, that's why they threw. But this isn't necessarily just about DazeD. This is about why I wouldn't base this team around DazeD, and there's also other reasons why I wouldn't base this team around DazeD, and that's because I want this to be a complete team, and I think DazeD is a kind of in-game leader. If Steel could get these players that I would get for him, he would. But because he can't, he would just rather play with Torque, basically, like his friends, TCK, like maybe Mo, maybe Frost, maybe like A to Z, and just get that team going, basically. But I think DazeD would much rather value, the way DazeD values players, he values players that are like basically brain dead aimers that he could just kind of coach beforehand and tell them where they go and how to go. And if you look at it, really, the kind of team that I want to build with Steel, I want to build a team that is dynamic, that is okay to take chances, okay to open up their style, okay to do like some gimmicky things here and there, okay to test the waters. And I think that team would have a lot more room for growth than a really conservative, like, no, there's one way to play proper CS, like always make the extremely, EV plus play. And it's like, yeah, I mean, you could make the EV plus play all like a lot of the time, but I mean, there's no room for creativity in DazeD system, really, I would say. And that works for some players. That works for some players, but I wouldn't say it works for Swag. Even though Swag did well on I mean, he could have done a lot better under the guise of another league. That's what people don't understand. Like, people are like, well, Swag uses mouse excel, so I'll use mouse excel. Well, what if Swag like didn't use mouse excel and he was even better of a player? It's like, well, this player, didn't eat meat at all, and he's like really built and really strong. Well, what if that player did eat? Wouldn't he be, maybe he'd be even stronger if he ate meat and had a pure, proper fucking nutritious diet. Maybe he'd be even fucking more big. But to finish it off about the actual team that I'd get, Joshua Nasan would be the leader, unequivocally. And this is if the unbans happened. Now, beyond that, I would honestly have to go ahead and take my metric fuck ton of cash again, and I would grab an opper that would be on the team, and that would be Skadoodle. There's no way I would get any player other than Skadoodle for this role on this team. And I would basically just buy him off Cloud9 for whatever it costs. I'd go to Cloud9 Jack and I'd say, listen, Jack, I'm going to make you an offer you can't refuse. Basically, more or less. So, Skadoodle, although people will see him as having like a slump or whatever, and I don't know if it's a personal problem with him, his girlfriend or something, but the guy's a complete player. I mean, he's an absolute monster. He's an animal. He is very smart, very polished. He knows when to rotate. He knows when to hold. He knows when to like communicate. He's gotten so much better at comms. If you watched Katowice 2015, he knows how to hold angles so his teammates can clear other angles. Uses utility. Everything that he does, when to push, when not to push, what to watch, what not to watch. He does pretty fucking well, and I think him being in a stacked team that has the kind of communication that I would expect out of this team, and one thing that I would like really like push into this team is everybody's going to make clean comms, everybody's going to make calm communications. So there's going to be a culture of just trying to make as calm of communications as possible. And furthermore, everybody will communicate based on a guideline that I would work on with, one, a consultant, two, Steel, and myself. So basically, everybody would communicate, like, there's a protocol to how you're going to play once you play on this team. There's a culture set in place of what you're going to be doing once you're on this team. That just like, there's social media protocols that players like conduct policy, there's also a way that you're going to conduct yourself in practices, a way that you're going to conduct yourself, because this would be just a very serious team that's out to win there's championships and just dominate the scene. Like, this is not just a fucking plaything anymore. Not if I would invest this much fucking money into it. No way. And the other player that I would rob Cloud9 out of is pretty easy. I would rob Swag out of Cloud9. And the interesting thing about Swag is I wouldn't have Swag play as a lurker. Not as a slow lurker at all. I would have Swag play. I would get Swag and I'd say, Swag, I would basically I'd talk to all these players. Like, for Skadoodle, it would just basically be like, Skadoodle kill. Yes. So, I mean, there's not much there for me to talk to Skadoodle about. But for Swag, like, I'd rather just Skadoodle do his own thing and do what he's comfortable doing naturally. But for Swag, I'd tell him, look, the reason why I got you, I didn't get you to get a lurker or to get, a passive player who needs to who must survive to clutch out rounds or anything. I'm getting you actually because I believe that you can be North America's iteration of Olof Meister, of Device, of this playmaker, this fast lurker, this complete player who can op, who can rifle, who can, take chances, take risks, be aggressive, get a pick, fall back, throw a fake, get a pick, fall back, entry frag here with its team, lurk another part of the map. So basically, in this team, I would get Swag to follow the mold of an Olof or a Device and just say that's your role on this team. Your role on this team is the same as their role on the team. You will be the star carry of this team, playing exactly like that. Beyond that, the player that I would also get on this team would be Nitro. I would absolutely get Nitro to play on this team. Him and Swag are very good friends. It's not why I'm getting him to play. The reason why I'm getting him to play is because he's a fucking savage. I've seen this guy play just recently against Fnatic, and the amount of entry frags he got, triple entries, quadruple entries, is just insane. Like, he's absolutely... If North America has a dream team and you're saying, like, who could be the entry fragger? If you don't say Nitro, you're a fucking idiot. Like, it's just that simple. The fuck? 4th of January. Oh, okay. So that's my view on Nitro, really. And I think he absolutely merits being on any sort of dream team. And basically, I would buy him from Liquid. I'd pay whatever price. I sit down with the owner of Liquid, Steve, and I just hash it out, basically. Another player that I would grab from Liquid is Hiko. I'd get Spencer Hiko Martin to be our Flusha, basically, our lurker, our very passive player, our clutch player. I tell him, you have to be the guy who basically tries to make the EV positive play all the time. I want you to take as many risks as you feel comfortable taking. You're basically going to be playing in the mold of Flusha on this team. You're going to be playing in the mold of like a very passive, solid player who will be there for us in late round situations and supporting the team and whatnot. And I talked to Steele about this too. Like, these are the roles that I'd want this team to have and play with. And everybody is going to show up to practice. Everybody's going to dry run stuff. Everybody's going to get good on every single map. So there's no just practicing like a set amount of maps. We're going to hit the ground running and basically just immediately start trying to get good and get a setup on pretty much every single map based on what our next match will be. So if we have a match coming up on Inferno, if it works that way, if it doesn't work that way, it's like whatever. We'll just drill and dry run Inferno until we get it like polished, scrim Inferno until we get it polished, and then just go to the road with it and then go on to the next map that we would know. Also, the way the team would work, honestly, is let's say it's Team Rolex or something, like Team Asus or something. It doesn't have to, like, the sponsorship for the team. One of the main things that I would do for this team, sponsorship wise, is I would basically have all players, you can have your individual sponsor for your own peripherals. Just like in basketball, I mean, a mouse is way more intimate and important than a shoe for basketball. Basketball players can get their own shoe sponsorships, but Counter-Strike players can't get their own mouse sponsorships. I mean, what is this? So in this day and age, I think that Counter-Strike players should be able to, have their own individual mouse and mousepad and keyboard sponsorships, but all the hardware and all the other sponsorships will basically be team sponsorships. But that's one thing that I would do, is I'd let players keep all their individual sponsors for their mice and whatnot, even though I do feel like those are the most lucrative sponsorship contracts, which is why that might not be the case. But clearly, there are other sponsorships available, and I would try to take those. The other factor of the team is I think, like I said before, I would want a coach on the team who would basically, I'd want him to go into the team and kind of give Steele input, and I would let Steele decide who he wants his coach to be for the most part. I mean, maybe I'd have a little oversight over that, but the coach that I'd like to get actually is probably Farouk, is Pitta, and that's honestly one of the things that I was thinking is, if I were to make this team, I'd have to get a team that already has like an invite roster. So I'd probably, grab CLGs or something. I don't know what I would do actually. So that's if the unbans aren't happening, right? And that actually segues us pretty well into, what can America do if the bans are happening? Before I go into that, I want to say that what I would be doing, let's call it wheeling and dealing, would honestly open up some things. How would the rest of NACS look like if I were to do this, right? Well, the way the rest of NACS would look like is you would still have Cloud9, I think, be a major factor in NACS. Freakazoid would still be on Cloud9. I think CLG would die, to be completely honest. Tarik would be on Cloud9. Shroud would still be on Cloud9. So Cloud9 would become sort of like this this like stream team, and I'd get DazeD to be on Cloud9 as well. So DazeD would also be on Cloud9, and Nothing would still be on Cloud9, I think. and that would just basically be Cloud9. They could grab Koosta as well, but I think DazeD could call and op if need be, I guess. I'm sure he thinks that. I mean, he opted in source. So I would basically see that, or foresee that CLG would probably die. Conquest would stay the same. I think Complexity would stay the same. Complexity is an important team the way that it is. And I'll touch on this because I really think it's going to give Roka an opportunity to become less of a role player as he was before. He's always played as an entry fragger and more of a carry role where he's playing as a tradefragger or even a playmaker. So putting Roka on this team with Sansington, Sick, Fraud, and Rix, really what that tells me is that Fraud can be a support op and support. Sansington seems like he will become the team's support player more than anything. The only, like, looking at this team, you know, people can look at this team and say, well, Rix is a hold W kind of guy, Roka's a hold W kind of guy, Sick is a hold W kind of guy, meaning they just run around the map and they're aggressive riflers and they just try to kill people. And Sansington has traditionally been a hold W kind of guy who just runs around the map and tries to kill people. And I think that's what Warden wanted, is he wanted a team that was full of aggressive riflers, because that's what Warden used to be, and that's what Warden believes in. He believes in like 4 or 5 guys running into a site, killing people, and planting the bomb, basically. And if that's the case, and he feels like, oh, well, I'm just going to get a bunch of entry fraggers, and the roles won't be the roles will be interchangeable. I think what he'll soon find out is that somebody's going to have to pick up the slack. Somebody's going to have to play a certain role, and somebody's going to have to not play a certain role. So I think Sansington is going to pick up the slack of, you know, setting people up, throwing the nades that need to be thrown. You can't just run dry into sites and try to outshoot people. Maybe you can one round, take them by surprise, but after that, against any good team, I don't think you will be able to. But yeah, I mean, at that high of a level, it actually does take people by surprise. If it's like they didn't even flash, they just ran out and killed people. So I think, you know, Sick is going to continue being that entry fragger, and I think Roka can tactically, you know, trade off of Sick. Sansington will support. I think Fraud will be like a support op, and I think the only person who has like any preservation of life is Rix, and I think Rix will eventually start playing more of either like a trade fragging role or like a baiting role, or he will, and you know, bait both Roka and Sick, or he will start lurking on one side of the map and throwing fakes and doing stuff like that. So it'll be interesting to see how Complexity develops, and I'd like to keep a Complexity completely untouched the way it is, and not have like these different dream teams or whatever. But one thing for certain is, you know, DazeD would get to play with all the players that he wants to play with, which is like Tarik and Shroud and you know, players that he values, and I think he would do great. In fact, I would love to pay just to watch these two teams scrim against each other. I would love to pay to see like Nitro, Swag, Steel, Skadoodle, and Hiko scrim against freakazoid, Tarik, Shroud, DazeD, and nothing. Like, that would be awesome. That would be a great FPL match, you know, 5v5. But in all sadness and seriousness, it appears that the players that I'm talking about might not be unbanned. And that's a really sad aspect to consider, really. And I didn't think that I would ever be bothered by the fact that, you know, these players wouldn't be playing, but I actually have gotten bothered by it, because I saw it as these players were going to get unbanned in a year, and you know, everything was going to be up for review in a year, and there's no way that they could keep people banned for that long. You know, I was asked recently what I thought of the iBuyPower bans, and you know, in this case, I must first attempt to remove all personal bias when I opine. You know, personally, I'm motivated to see the iBuyPower 4 unbanned, because their unban would further the interests of making NACS more competitive and It would bring a higher quality of play into the region's talent pool immediately with the inclusion of Swag, DazeD, and Steel. That I also personally, as many people well know, have experience with crime and punishment, and it could easily be pointed out that I'm biased towards the appeal of a redemption story. With that being said, if I am to try my damnedest at removing myself of bias, I can only come to a few concrete conclusions, supported by evidence, logic, or rationale. 1. Match fixing is a crime which is punished by probation, fines, and lifetime bans in StarCraft, baseball, and other sports or esporting leagues. There is a precedent for this, but it was for actual fucking currency, involving millions or hundreds of thousands of dollars. There's also a precedent for match fixing being curbed by entirely outlawing any sort of gambling or betting on sporting matches. Note, making this argument establishes, and the previous argument, the entire Steam market as a form of currency, and it would make the entire Valve commodity system come under the purview of gambling law. Match fixing is also a crime which, in the case of Dota 2 or in the case of Epsilon, will result in 1-year bans or suspensions or minor transgressions. Now, let's look at Valve's own argument from their blog post of January 26, 2015, Integrity and Fair Play. Valve stated, "The strength of professional Counter-Strike comes from the integrity of its players and teams." Now, rationally, logically, the players that threw and got banned and have been faced with the consequence of never being able to play the game they love professionally for as long as they live, a lifetime ban. It's my personal belief that those players have the highest integrity in terms of not match fixing ever again. Now imagine I were to bring to you 2 children exactly the same, boys, let's say, 5-year-old, whatever, boys. And they're just kids, they're messing around and fucking shit up and being dumbasses everywhere. And imagine one kid has a burn mark on his hand. And imagine the other kid has no burn marks on either hand, right? Which kid do you think would be more likely to put his hand on the stove and burn his hand? The kid who has been burned before and has learned from his lesson, supposedly? Or the kid who hasn't put his hand on the stove, hasn't been burned before, and there's no lesson to be learned from there. Like, he can still fuck up in that way and learn from that mistake and not be tried and tested. That's the way I see it. Tell me if I'm wrong. Comment below. Subscribe. But beyond that, let's look at the case of whether the severity of a punishment deters crime. According to almost every single statistic, does severity of punishment deter crime? We can Google it. Severity of punishment does not deter crime. You can see it in all these studies. According to the National Criminal Justice Reference Service, severity of punishment, there appear to have been no efforts to test the deterrent effect of punishment scientifically until the 1950s. Early studies of the relative deterrent effects of the death penalty and life imprisonment were limited by inadequate techniques of statistical analysis. More recently, studies in deterrence have come primarily from the economists and sociologists. Economists tend to conduct their studies under the assumption that punishment does deter crime. Sociologists presume that it does not. All of the studies have been hampered by inadequate data. Studies applying economic concepts to punishment deterrence question repeatedly have found support for the deterrence theory. Sociologists using different statistical tools than economists and generally intending to confirm the conventional belief among sociologists that crime cannot be deterred by punishment also have produced evidence supporting that deterrence theory. Although researchers generally have found that the frequency with which a punishment is applied is of greater significance to deterrence than is the severity of the punishment. Again, although researchers have found that the frequency with which a punishment is applied is of greater significance to deterrence than is the severity of the punishment. The frequency with which a punishment is applied is of greater significance to deterrence than is the severity of the punishment. The frequency-severity question is relatively unimportant and not particularly amenable to statistical testing, and considering the concept of deterrence, it should be remembered that the fact that a crime can be deterred by a particular punishment is not a sufficient argument for imposing that punishment. the persistence of rehabilitation as the dominant rationale for punishment despite the absence of any scientific support reflects the common fallacy in the social sciences that all good things go together. Given the choice between preventing crime by training the criminal to be good, rehabilitation, or deterring crime by imposing unpleasantness on criminals, punishment, people would like to choose the former. In fact, the punishment approach has been successful, and the rehabilitation approach as yet has not. The real choice is between deterrence and higher crime rates. Punishing people with severe punishments it doesn't. I mean, it marginal deterrence, right? I mean, it doesn't make people any less likely to commit those crimes or to make those mistakes. So people see this. Some research has shown that increasing the severity of a punishment does not have much effect on crime, while increasing the certainty of punishment does have a deterrent effect. Well, what's the citing here, right, Valerie? Deterrence in criminal justice, evaluating certainty versus severity of punishment. Clearly, enhancing the severity of punishment will have little impact on people who do not believe they will be apprehended for their actions. Similarly, enhancing the certainty of punishment will have little impact on people who do not believe that the sanctions to be imposed will be severe. So, the use of heavy punishment has been described as the least effective and least fair principle of sentencing. That's Martin Jacklin, the English legal system. Okay, what year was that? 2005? A study by a Canadian criminologist, Paul Gendreau, brought together the results of 50 different studies of the deterrent effect of imprisonment involving over 300,000 offenders. The report said none of the analysis found imprisonment reduced recidivism. The recidivism rate for offenders who were imprisoned as opposed to given a community sanction was similar. In addition, longer sentences were not associated with reduced recidivism. In fact, the opposite was found. Longer sentences were associated with a 3% increase in recidivism. This finding suggests that some support for the theory that prison may serve as a school for crime for some offenders. Now, I'm not talking about prison. What I'm clearly talking about is a lifetime ban. You know, this is clearly in reference to everybody who might say that, make an example out of them. Making an example out of them is complete, utter bullshit. There's no making an example out of people because other people are still going to do crimes, even if there's... I mean, look at fucking Saudi Arabia. There's still people fucking people out of the side of their marriage, despite the fact that anybody getting caught for adultery gets stoned to death and fucking flogged and shit. You honestly think that it makes a difference how severe you make the crime? People will still commit at the exact same rate, if not higher. The true deterrent is knowing that if you throw, you'll get caught. That's the true deterrent. It's not making the punishment severe as shit. That has nothing to do with it. Not statistically, not factually at least. Now, if the unbans don't happen, the players that I would like to put together on those teams would basically be Nitro as my entry fragger. Clearly. So this would be the core of the team. I wouldn't get Nitro, actually, off the start. Sorry. So let's start off with me having a dick ton of money, right? Because that's always a fun and popular idea. Well, I'd have to center the team around Cutler, actually, in my mind. So this is the guy who I would originally start to be the rock of the team. I'd have him be my caller. I saw him call things for CLG, and they honestly looked like better, but they looked worse at killing people, but they looked more organized. They looked a lot more difficult to beat. They did like random shit here and there that they threw around, and CLG actually looked like a pretty good team. And it looks like they're going to break up now, unfortunately. Maybe I'm wrong about this. Who knows? But I would basically go to Hotshot and I would tell them, I'm going to buy your Counter-Strike team off you. Take it off your hands, and here's a certain amount of money that you'd be making a massive profit off of. I'd buy the CLG roster, CLG Counter-Strike team. I'd keep Cutler. I would basically try to ship Tarik off or JDM off for Skadoodle, and I would get Skadoodle. on the roster as my opper. Honestly, JDM is not even that bad. Like, trading Skadoodle for JDM, it probably isn't like that. I would probably be losing in this trade, honestly, if I'm including Tarik. But I would include Tarik, actually. I would also trade off Tarik from this team. Even though I could technically keep Tarik. He's only 19. He's very raw. He could grow and become a really good player. I'd probably end up trading Tarik, to be honest. Not that I don't believe in Tarik, but I'd have to be absolutely truthful when I say this. But I just... Tarik has, I think, actually done much better as of late, huh? He got out of that slump. You know, it's funny, because I told him that one night he was just going to get out of the slump. He wasn't going to be in a slump anymore. But he still has to go to LAN and do a lot better. But the thing is, I think actually this could be a great time to swoop in and pick up CLG and keep somebody like Tarik. But there's basically 3 players that I could have play this role. And the role is basically that of, like, you're going to be our star carry role. Like, you're going to be our primary tradefragger. You're going to be our primary role. Like, you're going to be our star player, basically. And there's 3 players that I could put in this role. But before I go into that, so I'd have Cutler call and basically be a support player. And that way he can, set people up, and he'll be around for late round situations, and he'll be surrounded by a team of all-stars, basically. So Skadoodle would be the opper. I'd get Hiko to be a solo site player who also... basically, I think Hiko and Cutler would be our site anchors on either site. Hiko would be the small site, solo site player, and... Hiko is a massive asset just for that. He's also a massive asset just in terms of how smart he is, how polished he is, how well he plays. Beyond that, I'd also grab Nitro from Liquid and make him our entry fragger for teams for reasons that I expressed earlier. And now the other aspect of this is honestly who our star player will be. So that number 2 role, or that, playmaker tradefragger role, is either going to be Elige, who I think has serious potential to be a star carry for North America. He's smart, he's mechanically gifted, he just needs to put it all together and, gain the confidence and gain the vision that I need to be that star player. I need to be that complete, like, it's on me. He needs to have that internal mentality of a winner, that internal mentality of, I want the ball and I'm going to score. Give me the ball, throw me the ball. So once he gets that mindset, and I do think he's actually pretty humble. Once he gets that mindset, though, I think he could actually be one of NA's biggest stars. So Elige would be that player, probably, and if not, the candidate for all of this would be somebody like Nothing. So the idea would be, like, to trade Skadoodle and Tarik, or Skadoodle and Nothing for Tarik and JDM, or something like that, to COD9. And if not, we'd like smooth over the difference in cash, homie. You know what I'm saying? But Nothing, now that he's dedicated himself to the game more, he's streaming a lot less. He seems to be very serious about Counter-Strike. He seems to be a lot more dedicated. He seems to be a lot more there. He would also be a candidate for that role. The only issue is, I think he is a bit scatterbrained. He's still himself. Like, that's never going to change. He's never going to be that guy who, but is like, oh, what's the call? What strat are we running? Or, just, he's never going to not be that guy who, sneakily tries to make a play almost every round. He's just making a play. So Nothing, I think, is kind of like how Dave said, one of those guys that is either going to he's going to take risks and they're either going to win you the match, or he's going to take risks and they're going to lose you the match, which is interesting because, uh, Daze has all this respect for Nothing, but ultimately Nothing is one of the most, you know, he's like the paradigm of that kind of player in North America who is going to take risks and either win or lose the match for the team. But he does it very well, and he's been doing it for a long time, and he's very competent. It's not saying that he's not competent at all. He is. But that would be the idea. Is either Tarik, Nothing, or Elige would have to be that playmaker role for Team America, so to speak. And, whoever isn't on there there would also be, another team that would make up some individuals that could, get together and do things. And I think complexity would stay the same, and the TSM lineup that's rumored to be in existence would just about stay the same. And I think that that ultimately, like, Cloud9 could just be a team full of streamers, or it could not be a team full of streamers. I don't necessarily care, but you'd have like Freakazoid and maybe Tarik, maybe Nothing on the same team, and just go from there, really. But a lot of what would make a dream team is honestly just minus Adren plus Cutler and minus Fugly plus like Skadoodle. That could easily make Liquid a dream team right there. But that would take a lot of money to get Skadoodle out of Cloud9. So all these teams have like 2-3 good players. So there's parity within our own region, but it means that we're not necessarily doing very well against international competition until all these players get on one squad and start competing for these international events. And maybe, we can get 2 squads out of this instead of having 4 decent or 5 decent good squads. And that's generally the idea, is like, that's how you would build a team. So the only issue is the people that you'd build a team around now would have to be IGLs. So if Nothing has transformed himself into an IGL, hey, that's great. Hopefully that fixes a lot of the problems, and Nothing can call and be an IGL. And actually, if he can, Cloud9 looks really good if they could just pick up another player who, can work with them. And that might be the way that Cloud9's going and the way that Cloud9's headed. So we'll be interested to see, I guess, how this all develops. But if the unbans never do happen, it's a sad day for North American CS.